Hello, all. Welcome to the Random Thought Pod. I am your random thought leader, Bridge Livwat, and I am here today with Marie, a sex positive evangelical life coach from Love Maven. Hello, Marie. Welcome to the Random Thought Pod.
Hey, thanks for having me on, John. I hear I'm your first actual guest.
Yeah, yeah. I know, like Bethany's gonna be co-host now. So, like, basically,
That's cool.
yeah, or the girl. I don't know if I don't think we really used her name in the last episode, but she's great. I used to do ADD masterminds with her all the time.
Hmm.
Um, and that was more like kind of like a co-host gig because we just like do a ton of topics but yeah, and ADD Masterminds was interesting because it's like I just wanted to like keep pushing it to the next topic, and so I would really
Hmm.
dominate that
Ooh.
podcast, right? And then like the Wax Museum was like more of like a guest-driven episode where I just tried to get out of the way as much as possible, and so I think with this, it's like I think it's just going to be both. It'll be kind of like a
Cool.
50-50 enterprise where, yeah. And I think even, yeah, looking back on the pilot, I'm like, maybe I should have let her talk a little more instead of like trying to push to the next topic because it's like, yeah. So,
It's a
yeah,
work in progress.
it's a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. Um,
That's
so,
right.
yeah, so like as my first guest, I was like, let's talk internal family systems. Um, It was funny. I actually mentioned this to my therapist too. I'm like, I'm going to be learning about this, and my therapist is like, well, I'm not really an expert on that. And but can you explain it? What is
Can I,
internal
okay.
family systems? Like this is my understanding. I'll give you my understanding,
Sure.
and my therapist seemed to kind of agree with me that it's kind of like there's an internal family within you, and there's family members that have protected your inner child. Like my uncle protected me, and angry uncle protected me, my inner child, and it's like, and I shouldn't be, you know, angry at angry uncle. It's like just understand angry uncle was doing the best he could to protect your inner child.
Yeah, I've never heard it said that way before, but I kind of like that. That's kind of cool. And yeah, angry uncle. Um,
I don't know why I
yeah.
went with
So
uncle.
the the guy who started IFS, Richard Schwartz, he
Hmm.
talks about that we're multiple. Like we're not just one single personality. Like we have multiple inside us. So that idea of family having more than one member, right? And we all experience our lives as multiple. We just haven't had the language to really talk about it like that. So like when you're having a moment during Christmas, where you just feel overwhelmed with love and like reminiscing and your kids are with you and like that's a part, coming up. A part of you is feeling that. Or when you're activated or triggered by something, there's a part in you that is triggered by that. Um, or when you're super, super angry for because someone has been unjust. Like there's a part of you. So it's not all of you at once, right? You have
Okay.
these parts that are showing up um, in these ways. So the parts the parts are labeled our core self. So that's us
Uh
today,
huh.
right
Uh
here
huh.
in the now, the core self. And the core self is the leader. And then you have managers and fighter fighters protecting
Okay.
exiles. Okay. So the managers are the parts that, um, they're the parts that we're always kind of in communication with, that when we're feeling those emotions, that's kind of who we're in communion with. When we get triggered, often that's like exile energy coming up that the managers now have to try and manage.
Huh.
Firefighters are like extreme coping mechanisms when exile energy is getting really pressed on or coming up. So, drugs and alcohol, workaholism, perfectionism, those
Huh.
kind of things come in to distract us from that pain that's getting triggered inside by our inner child that's been wounded and still
Huh.
left back in those memories, still wounded. Am I making sense?
I think so. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, because like you kind of when you in the heat of the moment, like you don't realize what's going on, and I think you assume
Hmm.
that it's all you, right?
Yeah.
But that makes a lot of sense because like one of the things too that I was told in therapy is that it's like like when a thought pops into your head, you don't have to always dig to the depths to like rationalize it and try to understand it. It's like you have an emotion or you have a thought, you can just let it just sit with it, just be mindful and let it pass.
Hmm.
And so I think maybe when you do that, when you're practicing mindfulness, like would you say that these managers and firefighters are not involved?
Um, no, well, generally, like, so mindfulness, generally, I would say that, like, they're always present.
Hmm.
Sometimes they'll just step out of the way. The mindfulness part, it depends on like what you're doing. Are you trying to just clear all the energy and get to a state of nothing where there's nothing going on? Or um are you going inside being mindful of what's going on? So um so that there's two different ways to do that, I think. Like when we're overwhelmed, say, and we just want to like take some moments and grab some peace and try to settle our system, it's not really that helpful to just shove them all away and say
Hmm.
like, just be quiet, guys. Like, I need peace right now.
Yeah.
That's actually not helpful. It's more helpful to go in and meet with them and see why are they so activated, right? Like, and
Yeah,
talk.
and I think that more so like what she was kind of saying is like just sit with it. Just be like, okay, I'm angry right now. Let's ride this out and see where it goes. As opposed to like because I'm very quick to fill in the blanks and be like, oh, I'm probably angry because of this thing, but it's like not
Hmm.
actually like just letting the anger speak.
Exactly.
Um,
Yes. Being in a state of mindfulness with curiosity to see
yeah, yeah, yeah,
to see why are you angry? What's that about? Tell me more.
yeah,
And you'll
yeah,
often find that it it's not what you think it is. It's has something to do with something else. And like sometimes even for myself, I'll follow the trail. They call those trailheads, and you
uh-huh.
follow it down to something and you're like, "Oh wow, that's really bizarre how that connection was made within me." But here it is.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's really interesting too is that like often it's on the surface it looks like anger, but it's actually grief. And I think that's what I've
Yeah.
been learning is like I'm terrible at grieving. Like I'm just like, all right, what's the next thing, and move on, right? And I think that's kind of what happened too. Like when I sat down with my buddy Doug, who I founded the Wax Museum podcast with,
Mm.
and he says to me, the website's going to go down. Like the Wax Museum website is going to go down in September unless you take over it and transfer it. And he's trying to explain to me like the complexity of that.
Well,
And then I just like kind of realized while I was talking to him, I'm like, huh, you know what? Let's let it die. And I thought, the Wax Museum really was like a podcast that was something that Doug and I started. And I always like was very mindful of kind of like, is this honoring Doug the way that I'm doing this podcast? And then
mm,
ADD Masterminds, it was the same thing where it was kind of like, am I honoring Jeff, my co-founder? And now I'm able to do this where I'm not honoring anybody. Like it's just me. It's just mine, right?
yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm really excited about that, but I'm like, is there a mourning process that I'm skipping here? And
Mm.
I don't know. because I just don't do that. And so
Okay.
I think I need to learn what mourning is, because I just see mourning as non-productive. I'm like, I can't do that. I'm not. And so I guess that's a big learning I need. And maybe that is like, maybe that mindfulness and like just slow down instead of just moving on to the next thing, and allow that anger to speak. And maybe that anger will speak that it's actually grief. Or, yeah, I've got these firefighters of avoidance that are happening with these things.
That's
Like,
right.
yeah,
Productivity often can be an avoidance thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So so it was funny because I had invited you on to talk about internal family systems, and then like on June 20th, you had this like thread that I just thought was so interesting. And I just honestly just want to read this thread and talk to
Sure.
you about it, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said the other day I was watching a video of Dick Schwartz sharing with the Dalai Lama about the IFS model. He wasn't allowed to say the word parts or self because they hold negative connotations to Buddhists. Instead, he used the words power and care. These worked well. I really like the whole power versus care. Like that's such a beautiful way of reframing it.
Yeah.
Like I think like especially like kind of coming from like kind of a Christian background where there's kind of like self, and it's like death to self, and that becomes such a toxic thing to think about how like your self needs to die. And then
Yeah.
when you like, for me it was kind of like, okay, I still think that there's a bad thing about selfishness, but I'm like, the more kind of pagan way of looking at things is to say like higher self and lower self. And I'm like, okay, so death to higher self and, and life to lower self, right? Is kind of, although almost I would say that sometimes you do need your lower self. It's like, I just need to be petty for a moment, right? And I'm not good at that. But I
Yeah,
do
like
like
that.
like power and care is a lot better, because then it's like, am I seeking power or am I seeking care? And maybe that care portion, needs to be self-care too. And maybe that allows the lower self to sometimes do what it needs to do.
Yeah. I mean, there has to be balance between power and care, right? Like the our parts that want power, want to exercise control because it's a
Yeah.
safety issue. They just want to know what's going on. They want control. It's a safety issue. But when it becomes too much power, it comes at the expense of the rest of the system for that part, right? And we see that in the world where in capitalism there's the exercise of power makes people richer, makes people are more greedy, and at the expense of other people in the population. So there's this idea of balance, and you have to approach the power and care balance with curiosity, but with compassion. And that's the biggest key in IFS is compassion. Um,
Hmm.
the, coming from a Christian background, we have this idea of dying to self,
Yeah.
serving others, and in and of itself, like on the surface, that doesn't sound like a bad thing.
Right.
Um, but it's backwards, right? It's backwards. You can't take care of other people if you are not taken care of first,
Right.
right? So you can't pour from an
Yeah.
empty cup. That's a thing. And we were taught in the church, get up early, do your devotions, fill up with God,
Hmm.
and then you can go about your day. And you know, there's value in that for sure, but it had to be done this one way. It had to be
Yeah.
focused in this one area. And that's really limiting. That's the ultimate side of power is you have to do this, but do it this way.
Okay. So we talk about like reading the Bible daily. It's so funny because like, and I mentioned this on the last episode. I like finally stopped reading the Bible. I guess it's been 2 weeks ago now, I think. And I hadn't been to church in like a month and a half, and it was interesting going back to church because like I found like a really good church to go to.
Awesome.
And it's like it's a very like progressive church, and it's just an interesting approach to scripture. Like this past Sunday, pastor was talking about the eunuch, and that story of Philip meeting with the eunuch, and how the eunuch's like reading this, scripture where it's from Isaiah that says, like a lamb led to slaughter, and it's like she was explaining that it was like the eunuch identified with that person who was a lamb led to slaughter, but didn't know who it was. He's like, this is really powerful, but it's like I need someone to explain this to me. And then Philip explains who that scripture is about, and then the really interesting thing too is like then after that, like the eunuch is like, hey, so there's some water. Like they're in the desert, and the eunuch is just like, hey, there's some water. Like what's stopping me from being baptized right now? And then Philip baptizes him, and then when he comes out of the water, Philip's gone. And it's just like such a like bizarre story. And I'm like, there's some like very beautiful things in scripture. And it's cool to be able to connect with that and find kind of those selections and some of that insight into that ancient wisdom. But it's like the day-to-day of like I must read through the entire Bible. It's like it's kind of amazing to be free of that right now.
Yeah.
And I may return to it a little bit more because like there was actually one Sunday too where someone's preached, but they were using like the indigenous version of the Bible. There's like an indigenous translation that talks about the Great Spirit, and it's beautifully written. And so I started reading like the creation story.
Oh, cool.
And it's so different. Like it's like I'm like I don't know if they're trying to like hold to the traditional scripture, but I'm like this just looks really interesting. So, but I need a fresher way of looking at it, and I feel like there's still like just some passages that are just so problematic, and I can see how they've been used in the worst ways, and so it's really hard to engage with that. But somehow I'm still going to church, and I'm finding that there's life-giving wisdom.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any desire to find life-giving wisdom outside of the Christian faith?
Do I have life-giving wisdom outside the Christian faith? Huh. I don't like, I guess a lot of it is like my personal experience, like with the divine. Like I just like, for me, my fundamental understanding of who God is really through being a dad.
Yep.
And so kind of that father's heart and understanding how I love my children, and then imagining someone that's even better at loving.
Yeah.
I'm getting an echo.
Take that and apply the IFS lens as your core self being that divine in you, and the rest of your system being your kids. Right? So that kind of love and compassion is what our systems need. And so often, like, we get stuck in these, this idea that our parts of shame or our parts of loathing, self-loathing, as they activate and trying to motivate us, the gift of compassion for them from us to help them move into a space of compassion is the healing work. Right? And I mean, we know by experience in our own lives that judgment, condemnation, and ridicule never heals us. Like it never
Yeah.
heals us. It only
Yeah.
alienates us further away from where we're supposed to be, right at the center of love. And we've we've grown up in a world that often uses those parts and has developed those parts and socialized us with those parts, that we use them as motivation. But really, they won't bring us to the center of love. They'll just keep us frozen. And those parts within us don't understand that. They're doing the jobs that they've been given. They're doing what all they know what to do, but they need the leadership of the core self to move beyond those jobs that will help them position themselves in the center of love. Does that make sense?
Huh. I think so. Yeah. So it's that core self, and it's that core self where I need to find my values, because I'm realizing that it's like, like that, I think is something I need to really dig into, is what are my values actually? Because that will dictate how I take care of myself and how I take care of others.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really easy to like get so centered on taking care of others
Mm-hmm.
and not taking care of self.
Right.
And I think like as a man, I know all of the kind of innate toxicities that are within me, whether that's something that, I was born with, with the testosterone, or whether it's actually just patriarchy, that's in me. But it's like, I know that there's kind of this monster I'm trying to shield everyone from.
Mm.
And so it's like, I guess like core self and actually having values, I wonder if that displaces that. Because like for me, it's kind of like I would rather destroy myself than hurt others. And that's not a healthy way of being. And maybe it is that like, that toxic masculinity is still integrated in me somewhere. And knowing that, it's like, well, I got to shield everyone from this toxicity in me. And it's like, well, can I separate myself from that toxicity so that it's not a part of me anymore?
Right. Right. So you have a part that believes another part of you is monstrous.
Yeah. And I don't know if, like, I don't think that that's tied to my Christianity so much as it is how I know that I identify with what people, when people say all men, right? When they're like, when people say not all men, and it's like, actually, I think it is all men. And I'm like, well, there is a part of me that is that, and I'm working. And I think it's a lot too, like when we talk about like our own racial biases too, where it's kind of like, well, I'm not a racist, people will say, and I'll be like, well, I still know that there's parts of me that are, and it's just been so ingrained into who I am that I have to fight it constantly and figure out how to root it out.
What if you went to the root of it? What if you went to the root of it and just sat with it, right? And asked it some questions about why that part's showing up that way. That's
so uncomfortable.
What's it afraid of, right?
Yeah.
Because like generally, it's those parts they act out of fear, right? They're afraid, or they're just trying to protect. And that, if you can have compassion on those parts that you don't like, right? Those parts that have been really formed by patriarchy, those parts will be able to kind of deactivate a little bit, enough so that it can receive healing from the core self. And redirection.
And what I picture is like just sitting down with that monster and having compassion for that monster.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
almost like the inner child, and then there's the big monster, and the inner child is just like, hey.
but you might find that the big monster is not a monster at all. You might find that that big
Hmm.
monster is a little boy who got hurt somewhere, and
Wow.
that manager is protecting that little boy.
Hmm. Wow. I'll have to think about that. Um, okay. So you said as I was watching, I began to see not only the microcosm of how these words interact. So I think we're talking about power and care again within. So how these worked. Um, okay. Not only the microcosm of how these words interact within, but also the macrocosm of how they react outside of us. Fear always seems to be the root of
Mm-hmm.
power. I find it interesting too that you're not, because initially when you were talking about power and compassion, I'm like, oh, not power, compassion. And you're kind of saying, no, you got to integrate the two,
Yeah.
which is much more complex than how I was initially looking at this.
Yeah. So like you don't want to give away all your power, right? Like in who you
Hmm.
are as an individual and your core self within your boundaried experience of life, you have power. You have power that is good. You have power over your
Hmm.
choices. You have power to choose how you are going to move through the world when your parts will cooperate. Um,
Yeah.
so that power isn't a bad thing. It's when it comes out of balance with care. And that balance, it's like the core self holds both and can choose when to be operating more out of one or the other. That's where that liminal space of choice between an event and a reaction is what do I need to choose in this moment? Do I need to choose power and um, put up some boundaries and really honor myself in that, or choose care to put myself aside and listen to what this person is saying to try to understand, like if it's safe
Yeah.
to do that kind of thing. Um, as soon as when we want to get rid of something like power, we're exiling a part of ourselves then. And we don't want to do that. We
Hmm.
want to bring all our parts into community, and we want that family to be in a relationship in a loving, compassionate way where our core self
Wow.
leads. Um, where they are comfortable giving their power to the core self, where it's not always operating in polarizations, where each part isn't
Huh.
afraid of the other.
Wow. That's beautiful. Um, yeah, and I like that, like listening, the whole listening aspect. Like, I know I'm very much driven by my curiosity. And it's just like, it's the most beautiful thing to just sit down and listen to someone
Mm.
and try to understand their story, try to understand their perspective. Um, and it's like my favorite thing to do.
That's cool.
And so I guess also I need to be curious about my own integrated parts
Yeah,
and listen with the same compassion that I would listen
absolutely.
to someone else with.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. The fear that has saturated much of evangelicalism is simply the byproduct of theology that was designed to stay within very small parameters. Everything outside of those parameters is bad within that system. So this inhibits a lot of things, right,
Mhm.
for those who are still in evangelicalism.
Yeah. And some people need that kind of boundaried safety. Some people
Right.
some people need that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
The problem
Hmm.
comes is when those people say this is the only way to be, or this is the only way to live,
Mm-hmm.
and you must live this way.
Yeah.
They're stealing our power then.
Yeah.
They're making the choice for how we should live.
That's well said, because that's been part of it too, is like being kind of like liberated from a lot of these things.
Mhm.
And then it's like, what is my relationship now to evangelicalism and evangelicals, right? And it's like, I want to let them be,
Yeah.
because I'm like, there's no point in fighting it. Like they can't think outside of that. At least they're not ready to, for a lot of them, right?
No, and it's fearful. Like to think
Yeah.
outside of that box and to really make those kind of questions really goes against the system that they are immersed in.
Yeah, I guess what's tough is like a lot of times, like if I talk about any of that kind of like the negative, like the bad things that are happening in those spaces, you know, the evangelical is very quick to say, well, there's bad people everywhere,
Mhm.
you know? And it's like not being able to acknowledge that there could be something wrong with the system that's
Yeah.
creating a more toxic space than what you see in the general population.
Yeah.
And I guess like being able to say, well, okay, they're maybe not ready for this conversation right now.
Yeah.
And being able to just kind of like let that slide, because it's like it's not my job to fix that.
No.
I like what I heard, actually. I think it was on an evangelical podcast where they said, you don't fix culture by railing against it. You fix culture by creating it.
Yep.
Right? And it's like that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm trying to create a better culture. And if people want to come along, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's like then it's like learning how to kind of set those boundaries so that people can be wrong, right? Like, people can like just be like, all right, well, this is how I see it, and this is the way it is, and just be like, okay, like let them have that reality that doesn't jive with mine,
Mhm.
but giving them the space for that.
Yeah.
And I guess as soon as they start to encroach on my space, then it's kind of like, okay, this needs to stop.
Yeah.
Like I'm okay, you know, like
Mhm.
you're going to be that way. That's okay. But don't try to enforce that on me.
Exactly.
I'm finally free of all that.
Yeah.
Okay, so just like in IFS and working with our parts, we can have compassion on those still in those beliefs. To them, it means safety, which is essentially what you were saying. To them, it means safety. And I think that's a really important thing to understand.
Mhm.
And I guess that's something I haven't thought too much about, is like, for them, that is safety. And so have compassion for them. You know, that they need to hold to this. They need to stick to this.
Yep.
And they're not prepared to say, like, consider that there's something broken in the system, because that system is safety for them.
Yep.
I saw an interaction on Twitter that like just like blew my mind. Where there was like somebody was talking about love, and how like for the LGBTQ community, it's like love is core to their identity.
Mhm.
And to try to take away that love is like, I would rather die.
Yeah.
That's kind of their perspective.
Yeah.
But this like really homophobic Christian was like saying, well, this is truth. This is truth. This truth is core to my identity. Like, if I lose this truth, I lose eternity. And I never thought of it that way before.
Wow.
But I'm like, oh, I can't take that away from that person.
No.
Like, they need that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're not ready to lose that. And it's terrifying to lose that.
It is. My first year of like major deconstruction was brutal. Like, it was brutal. I have always been a person who has believed in like the goodness and love of something greater. So I did still have that, even though I didn't understand what it could
Yeah.
be anymore. Um, and I no longer really need to put a label or put it in a box. So, I do my own spiritual practices where I feel like I'm bringing my system into an alignment with what I consider love to be, which is
Right.
contained within my own boundaried view, meaning I don't require other people to live like me. I can allow them to live how they
Yeah.
want. But
Yeah.
when they begin to say how I'm living is wrong, that's where the problem starts, right? That's like
Yeah.
within your system, you have one part calling another part monstrous. Well, that monstrous part won't like that very much, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, and so I've always had this sort of belief in something divine, something greater. And my beliefs don't cause harm anymore to other people. Not that I can see anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I practice those beliefs because as I practice them, they do bring me that peace, calmness. It makes me more curious about the world around me. It purges judgment from me. I'm able to allow people to be where they're at as long as they're not causing harm to others. Um,
Yeah.
the first year of deconstruction was so hard because the structure that I had really put a lot of my life into, the church, I could no longer buy into. And so it really did take the foundation out from under me. And the domino effect of that in my life was really, really hard. It was traumatic. It was a traumatic year and a half, 2 years. Um, but what I've come to is this underlying foundation that I didn't really understand was there. This idea that I can have faith in something I don't really understand. Um, and I don't need to put it in a box or label it, whatever that divine thing is. I can continue to live my life
Yeah.
on the journey to find more love and not have to know about what's at the end of it. Because at the end of it was always, it felt like that, that treat dangled before us to keep us going. Um,
Yeah.
and now the treat is more like the living every day and being present
Yeah.
with compassion for myself and for others. And being okay in practicing the beliefs that I have and being okay in allowing others to do the same. So I've kind of switched from this place of sitting at the head of the table filled with judgment and this false sense of concern for people to become more like me to
Yeah.
I show up at the table now and again to say like, hey guys, how's it going? And I'm fine. I don't need to sit and preside over anybody anymore, except for myself.
Wow.
That
It's
was a long
beautiful. It's
tangent.
funny, like as you're talking about, like I don't know where this is headed, right? Like it's like getting kind of like that eye off of this eternity that you're promised, and as you're talking about love, and for me, it's just kind of like, well, I don't know if there's this like eternal reality or not. And I feel like the way I'm aligned, I'm like, I'm going to be fine anyways if there is. But like the idea of like everything just ceasing, I find peace in that too. Like I'm just kind of like, man, like this
Mhm.
can't, like this going on forever sounds like exhausting. Um, but as you were talking, I was thinking about love, and I'm like, Ben, like love is infinite. Like there's just never an end to love. And so if that's the case, then this journey of love, it's like maybe that's infinite too, and that I can live with.
Yeah. I mean, what's that law of science that like energy is like it never disappears,
Cannot be created or destroyed.
right?
It changes form.
Like
Sorry,
energy
what
never
you're saying?
disappears. It just changes form somehow. Like you can't
Yeah,
create more or
yeah,
like destroy energy. Like it just changes form. And so,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
we understand such a limited amount of what is around us. And only in the last like 100 years has our understanding exponentially grown. So we've been
yeah,
living for thousands of years with such a rudimentary, like just super basic understanding of the world. And
yeah,
we want to reach back and hold on to those beliefs to bring us into our future. Like it doesn't make sense to me
yeah.
anymore. But what does make sense is
No,
the people we are today. We have the capacity to choose love, and we have the capacity to choose
yeah,
power and care, right? So today,
yeah,
the the message and the music we want to create is still the same kind of flavor as it always has been, but it's going to look different, right? So today we have a wonderful LGBTQ community. Wonderful. And they're
yeah,
very expressive.
yeah.
And I love them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I love
Yeah,
them. And
yeah,
lots of people don't. And
yeah,
I think moving into our future as, you know, thinking from an IFS standpoint, our core self has to learn to embrace all our parts because all our parts are there for a reason. They were created to protect us. Our system, you know, a lot of them were created and assigned jobs because of trauma, and those parts can get healed and learn to come and be in community with everybody. And we can see that in the world. That's what I was talking about in that post. Like you can see the internal experience is also external within our world. It's just bigger. And so when we're motivated by fear and all the time, and we don't have a leadership of curiosity, compassion, connectedness, courage, then we go into lockdown mode, and that's what we're seeing. That's what we see in our world. That's why we see people hating on LGBTQ people because they're afraid, they don't understand. And when we move beyond the fear and we move into the curiosity, compassion, and understanding, we're able to welcome in differences that we weren't before. Like we don't need to understand, but we need to love.
yeah,
You know, someone wanting to be a trans person out there does not affect my life, but it sure affects theirs. And if that's what they need to live a happy life, then why not? Like, why not? Right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I. It's hard to understand that kind of closed thinking of it. And I guess part of it is like kind of this like I holding to an ideology that you know what's best for the people around you, which is something that religion really teaches people. And so that's kind of where it's like, all right, well, that's safe for you. but it's not safe for
Hmm.
them.
Yeah. Like,
And maybe that's the approach, is to say like that's where we're at. Like that's not safe for them, and you're making them
yeah.
unsafe.
And
Like what what's incredible to me too is like, so I was thinking about this, like how harm reduction measures, right? When we talk about harm reduction measures for like primarily we talk about that for narcotics, but I think like that's true for gender affirming surgery and like stuff like that. But I'm like, it's interesting to me how people who think that the harm reduction measures don't work are against them, like fiercely against them. And those who believe that the harm reduction measures do work, basically being against those harm reduction measures means that they're for harming those people.
so, I,
So basically that becomes hate. Like it's inadvertently wanting harm to someone else is hate. And so these people who think they're doing good by being against harm reduction measures are actually enacting hate on those people, assuming those harm reduction measures actually
right.
work.
So I can't remember what podcast it was. I think it was on Hidden Brain a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was on Hidden Brain. It was a podcast about the marshmallow test. Have you heard about the marshmallow test? Okay. I can't remember
Yeah,
the guy's name who did it.
yeah, but do
But
explain it.
so basically, when it was done, they came up with the conclusion that people with more self-control would have better lives. Like were able to make better choices, and they did follow those kids through the test till into adulthood, and the ones who were able to hold off on eating the marshmallow um, ended up having more productive lives. So
Right.
this other lady who worked with kids, um, she kind of redid the marshmallow test because she worked with kids um, from with really traumatic backgrounds. And so she redid the test because it didn't feel right to her that she would see in her daily practice, she would see kids who, they would receive a toy and it would get broken by the end of the day. Um, or they just had no ability to put off self gratification. And so she kind of tweaked the test a little bit and included factors that whatever the kid was expecting would happen would influence the choices they made. So she had um, a classroom, and the teacher said, you can start your art project with these crayons, but if you wait 10 minutes, I'll come back and I'll have better supplies for you. And so she came back
Right.
without supplies, and some of the kids, okay, how did it go? I'm not saying it right. Basically, it was that the kids who had no expectation of stability didn't have the ability to exercise self-control. So if there was a lot of chaos at
Right.
home, right? Or they lived in
Yeah.
poverty, or they had lots of trauma, the expectation would be that whatever happened in this moment probably wouldn't happen tomorrow. There's no guarantee of anything good happening, right? And those are the kids that would
Right.
often just eat the marshmallow. So kids who had more stability in their home life had the understanding and ability and expectation that good things were going to come. They had the expectation that what they were promised
Right.
would happen. So they could have more self-control because they expected what they were promised to happen. Now, in that really terrible way of explaining the podcast, you can take that and understand why people who come from low socioeconomic status people who have a lot of trauma, um, people who've had hard starts to life often become people with firefighters in their system of alcoholism, drug abuse, stuff like that. And those people
Right.
become the people on the streets, the downtown east side in Vancouver. They become the people that the rest of society
Yeah.
does not like. Right? And how, like, that makes me so angry because not only did they have a shit start in life, but then society blames them for it and continues to shame them and do that.
Yeah.
And so it's the cycle that doesn't ever help a person.
It's interesting too that there's like just that judgment of those little shits that just ate the marshmallow right away.
Right.
Like, I'm like, they're kids. Just let them have the marshmallows. Like, who cares? And so it's interesting how our society is set up with that judgment, even like with like children. You know, where it's like,
right,
little brat, like,
right.
And it's like there's something like an element to being in the moment. Is like Father Richard Rohr talks about how he learns presence from his dog, and I was like, oh, that's so wise. And then I got a dog, and I'm like, my dog's an idiot. Like, you know, like he doesn't have any concept of the future. He'll eat anything, right? But I'm like, what is the shame? What is the shame in enjoying the moment? And it's like, why do we always want people to think long term? And I'm like, how much of that long term thinking is really like kind of that capitalistic thinking where it's like, you know, save it for later, compile it, pile it up.
I mean,
right? And it's like,
there's
we just
a place
have this
for delayed gratification, obviously. There's a place for that in life. Like, we need that ability and skill.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd be in trouble. But there's also a place for enjoying today.
Yeah.
And eating the marshmallow right away. There's that's the balance between power and care, right? That's the balance. Like
So is that taking that?
Like
that would be power? Would you say then to like eat the marshmallow right now? It's like I'm taking control of this situation. Oh, really? Because it's like I don't trust the power of this person that said they were going to give me something better later. I'm going to take my power and eat the marshmallow.
And at the same time, I'm caring for myself because I'll really enjoy this thing right now.
Yeah.
And it's not going to cause harm to my future by eating this marshmallow right now. Now, if you had that attitude every hour of every day, it would cause harm, right?
Yeah.
It's a balance. It's creating that balance of listening with curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Listen with curiosity. So listen with curiosity to my integrated parts.
But not just curiosity, with compassion. Lead with compassion. Always.
And self-compassion. And self-compassion is like such a big thing to learn when you've spent a lot of your life thinking you have to die to self.
Yeah, think about when like you're upset about something and you're trying to express that, and your most important people just kind of like dismiss you, like what's the big deal? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that feels really shitty, doesn't it? Like, you're just like, okay, I'm so not important. Well, when we have that attitude with parts of our system, especially the parts that we don't really like, which is another part of us not liking that part. It's not the core self. The core self doesn't not like parts. Right. The core self is that neutral, divine, open space of acceptance. when we take that position of not liking part of ourselves, that empowers shame. It empowers judgment within us. It empowers other parts of us at the expense of that part. And then that part doesn't feel heard. And often, all healing is those parts within us being heard and witnessed and held and validated. That's the healing work. And if you take that,
Wow.
when we do that for others, when someone's in an unregulated space and we do that for others and we really see them and we really hold that space for them and understand and validate them and how healing that is for them, being embraced by another human like that, having that kind of compassion and understanding. Well, we have to do that with our systems. We have to do that with self too. And because that is the space of healing, is bringing people into community, bringing connection. Like in IFS, there's the 8 C's of the core self. Okay. And I have the list right here. Confidence, calmness, creativity, clarity, curiosity, courage, compassion, and connectedness. It's a wonderful list. And so when you're like operating in those spaces, that's the space of the core self. And that's the space that I imagine that the divine operates in.
Yeah. I like that. That's the space that I imagine the divine works in. I like imagination is such a beautiful way of stating faith. Like, it's like that's what it is. It's imagination. And people want to make it something more than imagination. And I think that's where we run into trouble. And that's when we get into arguments. Because if it's more than imagination, then you need to see it too. But like, if it's something that's imagination and it's actually something that's pushing you toward love, if the divinity is love, we're going to be fine. And I was going to say a lot of faith in that, but I have a lot of imagination for that. And I think it just takes us to a more beautiful place. Well, wow. This is good. This is good. And I feel like it's kind of what I've been doing for others, I need to do for myself. And I need to work in that space. So you've given me a lot to think about, and hopefully given our listeners a lot to think about.
I'm sure we have.
Thank you, Marie. Okay, so Love Maven. Tell me about Love Maven.
Well, that's my website, and that's the kind of the name that I chose for my business. A maven is someone who like gathers information and disseminates it. It's like a focal point of coming and going.
Okay.
And as I've really let go of a lot of the boxes that I used to cling on to, I've created more space within myself for love to occupy. And I wanted that to be the basis of my life coaching, of how I show up for people and how I hold space with people. And what that means is holding that compassionate, curious space with others, helping them understand their systems. Because in my journey, that's been the greatest healing that I've ever experienced, was the self-understanding and self-acceptance and bringing my parts, all my wounded parts, into alignment and loving them how they needed. And the experience of that has been so powerful for me that I want that to be what I do for others. And it's a very non-judgmental space, which is what I love about it the most, because there is no judgment. There's no your life is your life. And as we unpack it and share it together, there's no room for judgment because it's your life and your experience and how you've experienced your parts and how your system is developed. And it's so interesting. And love really has been at the center of it all. Even though we have parts that have shown up with fear and protection, love really is at the center of that. We just have to unpack it, and we have to help those parts to step into that space where they don't have to be afraid anymore. And that's what I want for other people.
That's beautiful. All right, so
Thank you.
I'll put a link to that website. It was funny because we were talking about life coach, and I was thinking, oh, I can make the same joke I made on ADD Masterminds, where I was like, what does a life coach do? It's like, you go buy those eggs and you make yourself an
Except
omelet.
It's not that at all.
But sounds like it's a bit different than
Yeah,
that.
no, it's actually not that at all. You don't. You cannot take up space in someone's life telling them what to do. Everybody has the answers within them that they need.
Yeah.
I don't have to give anyone answers. It's already there.
Yeah.
We just have to find them.
That's similar to what I learned in
That's similar to what I learned in intro to counseling in university. Was it's essentially you're just basically facilitating them.
Yeah.
Finding their own healing or finding their
Yes.
own solutions to their problems,
Yes.
right? And so that's really cool. So we'll have a link to that, and
Thank
we'll
you.
have a link to your Twitter. Is there anything
What's that?
else we want to add in there? That's good.
Yes.
You're Kootenaygirl 69.
Yep. Good.
I will never not laugh
It's done
at
its
that.
job then.
Well, thank you for being
It's
my
been an
first
honor, John.
official
Thank you so
guest.
much.
It's always a pleasure.
I love talking with you.
to you. I love talking with you too. And I love letting you wonderful listeners listen in on these conversations. I'll also put a link to my Twitter so you can respond to whatever you want to respond to on this. There will be clips online of my favorite parts of this. I'm also now on Blue Sky, as are you. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
for the invite on that. I could put a link to my profile on that too. Did you know Blue Sky only has it's something
I know, it's not that
160,000
many.
people on it?
You can put a link to mine too if you want.
Yeah, I'll put your link too. I will. It's such a fun space, so I'm hoping we can invite more people into it. All right. We'll do this again for sure at some point.